Fire on the Mountain, Norma R. Youngberg. Chapter 1, The Escape. Along the hills of Borneo there is a sparkling pool set like a jewel in a hollow of the rocks, a pool so clear that it looks as though a child might wade through it, but it is fully 20 feet deep. There it lies, surrounded by grassy slopes and a great forest of trees. The stream that feeds it flows down the mountain over a stony bed, steep and long, and the sound of its rapids can be heard for a long, long distance. There is a Datsun village clinging to the green slope above the pool, and the music of the river has given the village its name, Singing Water. It was in this village of Singing Water that something wonderful happened. The time was not long ago. The season was summer. It is always summertime in those mountains. Sasky stood on the edge of the shining pool early in the morning. He studied his reflection in the water. As he looked into the blue mirror, he was very pleased with what he saw. No 12-year-old boy in the mountains of Borneo was stronger or better formed than he. He mumbled a few words to himself. This is the last day. The last day. He moved his lips but made no sound. The truth was that Sasky hardly knew whether he was happy or sad. He would go home this afternoon to his own village of Broken Light. After living for 5 years in Singing Water, he was going away, 6 miles up the mountain, back home to his father's house. He had lived in Singing Water ever since his mother had died. He was only 7 years old then. He had come to live with his father's brother, Uncle Sobat, and his wife, Aunt Gar. Once he had loved this village, but now it had become unbearable. Once it was safe and beautiful, now it was spoiled. He had talked the matter over with Kunin, the witch doctor in his own village. Kunin advised him to return to his father's house in Broken Light. Sasky heard a sound. It came from behind a large rock at the water's edge. It was the sound of words. Some person was talking. He could not hear much of what was being said. He could catch only one word, Bapa, which means father. The word was repeated several times. There was only one voice, and no one answered it. With quiet, cat-like steps, Sasky crept down closer until he could see what was behind the rock. He stood very still and scarcely breathed. He saw just what he might have expected. That new teacher, Rajan. Rajan was there behind the rock, and he was alone, yet he was talking to someone. He was kneeling on the sand. His eyes were closed and his hands were lifted. His face was covered with gladness. Sasky marked how his black hair curled at the temples and over his high forehead. He could see the scar Rajan had on one cheek. He saw the strength in the young teacher's raised hands and arms. His white shirt was open at the throat, and he wore dark cotton trousers like the one that Sasky had on. The boy turned away, slipped off his clothes, and slid into the water without a sound. Like all the boys of this village, he was an excellent swimmer. He moved through the clear water like a brown fish. As he circled and swam, he remembered that there was no pool of water like this in his own village of Broken Light. The people there drew their water from a spring trickling down the mountainside. He would miss his daily dips in the pool. He would miss Uncle Sobat and Aunt Gar and little Vivi, their small daughter. Well, it couldn't be helped. Ever since the new teaching had come to Singing Water, He had felt troubled and uneasy and uncomfortable. Crooning's advice was good. He would go back to Broken Light, where the old witch doctor ordered everything according to the customs their tribe had observed for hundreds of years. No one in Broken Light planted or harvested or married without advice from Crooning. They were fortunate to have him live among them. Even the people of Singing Water called on him for charms and advice, because they had no regular witch doctor of their own. Now this new teacher had come. Crooning told all the people in both villages to pay no attention to the stranger. This teaching is bad. Listening to it is like drinking poisonous liquor, he said. It makes people happy, but it destroys all the old customs and makes the spirits very angry. The end will be lots of trouble. You boys stay away from it. Then the old man had turned to Sasky. His long yellow teeth clicked together as he talked. You must return to your father's house in your own village. You are big enough to help him now. You don't need your Aunt Gar's care any more. You can cut the brush and carry the wood and boil the rice. Sasky studied himself in the pool. He was thinking about how it all had happened. Rajan's voice startled him. Peaceful morning to you, the teacher called. Peaceful morning to you, Sasky answered, according to the polite custom of his people. You swim very well. Rajan watched the lad skim and dive for several minutes. Perhaps I shall do better when I have been here as long as you have. Sasky didn't answer these words, but he thought in his heart, this man plans to stay a long time, a long, long time. The poison of his teaching will spread everywhere, and all will be spoiled. I'm glad I'm going back to Broken Light. The boy crawled out of the water and snatched up his scanty garments from the grassy slope. Then Raja called to him, Come and sing with us tonight. It is a great pleasure to sing. Don't you think so? Sasky turned to look at the teacher, who now was swimming in the pool. His body was brown and lithe like his own, and his features were similar to those of the people in Singing Water Village. Yet he was different. There was a sharp clearness about him and a radiance of happiness that made him always happy. His voice had the sound of joy and laughter in it. Sasky felt angry. I shall not come to sing, he said in a low voice. Today I will go back to my own village. Hearing this, the teacher Rajan leaped out of the pool and stood beside him. Are you going to the village of Broken Light? Are you going there to stay? Yes, I will stay there always, the boy replied. Rajan laid a hand on the boy's shoulder. You have heard some of the teachings about God. You know that He is our great Father up in heaven. He pointed to the sky. You know that He can always help you in any kind of trouble. Even in your village, He is close to you. Talk to Him. He will hear you. Sasky drew away from the friendly grasp of the teacher, and without more words he scrambled up the hill and hurried to his uncle's house. When Sasky had come to live with Uncle Sobat and Aunt Gar, Vivi was a baby not big enough to walk. Now she was 6 years old. Sasky came into the kitchen room of the little hut. Aunt Gar smiled at him. Come now and eat your rice. She ladled out a portion of hot rice onto a banana leaf. She put some boiled vegetables and a few small dried fish with it. He sat down on the floor and began eating with his fingers. The breakfast tasted so good. He remembered all the good meals Aunt Gar had cooked for him. Now, when he was to go home to Broken Light, he would have to cook his own meals. There was no woman in his father's house. Sasky was big enough to do the cooking for both of them. Crooning the witch doctor had said so. Vivi sat on the floor beside him, eating her own rice. She was big for her age, but she sat quietly and said nothing. In all of her life, she had never spoken a single word. She could cry and make queer noises of pain or surprise, but she could neither speak nor hear. Perhaps for this reason Uncle Sobat loved the child with more than ordinary tenderness. Even Saskia felt a fierce affection for the little girls whose face and body were so perfect, yet who had no hearing and no words. While Saskia ate his food, the child looked towards him often and smiled in a questioning way. She seemed to feel some uneasiness in his manner. Could she guess that he was leaving today? By midday he was ready to go. All he owned was in the bohangan on his back. He had very few belongings, so Aunt Gar had filled the bark container with fat sections of sugar cane and some fruit from the trees along the river. The bohangan was heavily loaded, and the boy bent his naked back under it as he climbed the steep trail towards the village of Broken Light. Saskia was glad the teacher had not seen him leave. Rajan would have talked to him some more about the God of Heaven. He wanted none of that. He was leaving this place and this hateful teaching. He would not need to worry about it any more. He regretted now that he had stayed so long. It must be 2 moons since Rajan came to Singing Water. Every night Rajan gathered the people and taught them songs about the God of Heaven. He taught them from the book of his magic. Saskia had gone to listen. He could recall many of the words from the book. He remembered more of the songs because the melody and the rhyming of the words made them slip easily into the mind and fasten themselves there. Never mind, he would soon forget. He would follow the good advice of Kunin the witch doctor, and all must turn out well. He might even become a witch doctor himself one of these days when he was old enough. He was out of sight of the village now. There would be no harm in resting. He loosened the straps of the bohangan from his forehead and his arms. He set the heavy bark carrier down beside the path and perched on a damp root, while the breeze cooled his head and dried the sweat that streamed down his lean body. His attention was attracted by a swarm of caterpillars clustered on the trunk of a tree across the path. Saskia knew they were poison. He would not touch one for anything. They burned like fire, but it was interesting to watch them. They moved like an army up the trunk of the tree. They crowded so close together that their gray-green bodies covered the bark for a couple of feet. One could not see the bark at all. They were so close and so thick. Saskia knew that if a man chanced to brush against a tree infested with poison caterpillars, there would be terrible consequences. His uncle had often warned him. Still, for a long time he sat fascinated by this evil thing that was so close to him. "It's just like the teaching of Raja," the boy said out loud. "It is running all over Singing Water Village. It can't hurt me if I don't touch it." He got to his feet and fastened the heavy bohangan to his back. Again he began to climb the steep side of the mountain. He stopped to rest often, and whenever he sat down and rested, he thought about Rajan and the new teaching. He became angry with himself. "Can't I get that fellow out of my mind?" he sputtered to himself. He tried to think of his home in Broken Light. He had visited there often since his mother's death. He knew exactly how it would be. His father, Paco, was an important man in the village. He owned several water buffaloes. He raised a fine garden every year and a field of mountain rice. He saved plenty of rice for wine, and one of the chief pleasures in Broken Light Village was drinking rice wine. The boy's heart skipped with pleasure as he thought of the long evenings when the rice wine would be passed around and the tom-toms would throb out their weird, sweet music while the dancers swayed and reeled to the beat of the drums on the village green. It used to be that way in Singing Water, but since Raja came, there was no more time for the drums and drunken dancing. Almost everyone wanted to go up to the teacher's house and listen to the stories he told and to join in the songs. Then Saskia thought of the clear pool below Singing Water. With sharp clearness, the scene of this morning came back to him. He saw again the face of the teacher raised to the heavens and heard the word Bappa. He remembered the look on Raja's face. He shook himself in torment. I do believe that teacher has bewitched me with his magic. Once again he resolved to think no more about the matter. With a start he saw that the sun was going down, and he was not yet home. He tried to hurry, but he had already dallied too much along the way. Now it was impossible to reach his house before dark. Fear took hold of him. He tugged at the heavy bohangan. He even thought of leaving it there in the path and running home as fast as he could. But to do such a thing would brand him as a coward. His breath came in painful heaves. His shoulders ached and his head throbbed. He stumbled up the mountain in the failing light. Now he was barely able to see the way. This would never do. He slowed down and climbed carefully. Now he was very quiet. The creatures of the night had come out of the forest. He knew what they were. The leopard cats, the fierce Malaysian bears, the huge wild cattle called timbandos, who would stalk a man on the trail and gore him to death with their horns. Then there were the wild pigs, great evil creatures with razor-sharp tusks. One blow from such a tusk could kill a man if he struck him in the stomach or the chest. Then there was the night-crawling snakes. Saskia shuddered. He felt paralyzed. Then he heard a slight sound. Something was creeping along the path. Or was it in the brush? What could it be? The frightened boy drew his belt knife and leaned his bohangan against a tree. He stood with it still fastened to his back. It would protect him from one direction. He lifted his knife and peered into the darkness, waiting.